I missed it earlier this morning. I just heard on Mike Scott's newscast. Fire at the Palace Grill.
Oh man, I was thinking about the same thing. That's the place just across the street from the
Johnny's Ice House.
911 center or whatever.
Well, yeah,
it's called. Yeah. And man, many breakfasts
Well,
in that place for me.
totally. Me too. George Lamperis and his family are really good people, and that really is a Chicago institution, that Palace Grill on Madison. And so, condolences go out to George and his family, and I hope they can get it back up and running soon. By the way, you're going to have to get. I mean, they've got all the local celebrities on the wall, like Charles Thomas, former HC7 political reporter. You're going to have to get him a new, probably have to get him a new 8x10 glossy.
Yeah, how did it get so far along to do that kind of damage?
I don't know.
You've got all these excuse the expression, emergency nerds across the street who I would think would call for the fire department at a moment's few seconds notice.
Yeah, but I mean, it would perhaps happen after hours, and nobody noticed it until it was, too far along.
And that place has no windows. I mean, that 911 center.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few windows, at least. You can't look across the street and see what's going on. But man, that's a tragic.
Yeah, that's no good. No good. Hopefully, hopefully they can get it back up and going. By the way, George and Palace Grill, that was one of those restaurants that was accosted by Lightfoot's COVID Stasi during the pandemic, citations and this and that, like so many other restaurants trying to make a go of it during the shutdown phase of our existence in Chicagoland. Anyway, all right, so well wishes to the Lamperis family and Palace Grill, and I'm sure all of its regular patrons feel the same way.
Yeah, a lot of restaurants, though, are having trouble reopening if something like that would happen because so much, the equation for restaurants has changed so much over these past few years.
Not to mention dealing with an insurance company.
Oh.
That's never an enjoyable experience. I certainly have not had an enjoyable experience dealing with it, my home, after the hurricane. But anyway, I digress. Not about me. It's about Palace Grill. And so well wishes for them. All right, let's get back to Tucker's interview with Putin. Turns out that Tucker is not going to do a reverse Mikhail Brishnikov and White Knights and defect to Russia. I think he's going to come back and remain an American. That's the good news, despite what you may have heard about Tucker Carlson being a Kremlin stooge. The other thing, too, I mean, we didn't even mention this yesterday, but the comedy of that one member of the EU Parliament from Van Damme land in Belgium talking about travel sanctions on Tucker Carlson for interviewing Putin. He's banned in the EU, Tucker Carlson. I mean, just out of their minds. And
totally out of their minds.
And what we learned from the 2-hour conversation he had with Putin is a lot of what we already knew, and some updating what we know, like when Tucker pressed him to release Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, which was a good moment. I'm glad he did, which Tucker point blank came in on whether he has his sights set on more of Eastern Europe if he were able to roll through Ukraine. And again, you're not taking the answers at face value, but all you can do is ask the questions and press the man and see if there's something that he says, the way he says it, the context he provides, that provides some insight to understand more about this dictator who lords over one of America's enemies. It's to increase our understanding so we make better decisions. And this is something that so many in this country who just have a knee-jerk antipathy toward Tucker Carlson or anything on the right don't seem to appreciate.
Anybody seen Boris Johnson, the former PM from Great Britain, who apparently torpedoed a peace deal just about 2 years ago that would have stopped this war before it really started? Putin makes that claim, of course, during the interview, that there was a deal, a negotiated settlement, and that Boris Johnson flies into Kyiv and torpedoes it on behalf of the Biden administration, which led to a war that would eventually cost over 500,000 lives.
Here is that exchange that Charles is referring to.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country
Zelensky
or
he's
the
talking
world?
about.
Can he do that, do you think?
Why not? He considers himself head of state. He won the elections. Although we believe in Russia that the coup d'etat is the primary source of power for everything that happened after 2014. And in this sense, even today government is flawed. But he considers himself the president, and he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not? He can. We negotiated with Ukraine in Istanbul. We agreed. He was aware of this. He even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. And we agreed with this proposal. And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, seems ridiculous and very sad to me.
See, this is that was not Nord Stream pipeline blowing up. That was just a sound effect with that Tucker clip. But anyway, this is sort of a consistent theme of Putin's, which is that he is a good faith actor, and it's the West's meddling, and it's the West's failure to keep its promises that that is the reason there is instability that precipitated this invasion. Now, I'm not subscribing to that argument, but that's his argument. That's what he's selling. That's what he's selling to the Russian people. That's what he's selling to anybody who's buying anything that is anti-West. And so, just again, so you understand and can respond on point, which is the point of discourse.
He has signed, initialed documents apparently that he's showing the rest of the world that, hey, we had this settled. We thought, until the British Prime Minister, at the behest of the crowd in Washington, derailed it, torpedoed it, and now so we went to war. I mean, he says he's got the proof.
Well, but this is a guy who also is, he personally wasn't, but his country is a signatory to the Budapest Memorandum in the early 90s between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, which was Ukraine gives up its nuclear arsenal, the U.S. provides some protection, Russia and all three countries agree to respect the territorial boundaries of the three nations at that time. So Putin clearly is not abiding the Budapest Memorandum, even as he's talking about whatever deal, even as he's talking about violations from his perspective of the Minsk agreement, which I think is very open to debate. Putin gave chapter and verse on that. Very, again, as you would expect, one-sided interpretation, very, very Russian-friendly interpretation of that document as it relates to the action that President Putin took. Dictator Putin, and his whole sort of the first trigger was this coup attempt that deposed Yanukovych, and that's when we took Crimea, and then the 2022 invasion is sort of an extension of all of the broken promises, the trail of broken promises that relate back to what he describes as an illegitimate coup, and then he also talks about sort of what you've heard before from Putin. The NATO expansion that was violative of what Bill Clinton told him back before he left office, and the relationship between eastern Ukraine and the Russian people in the Donbass region. So, I mean, there's a lot there. Of course, there is over 2 hours, but it was a productive conversation generally, I thought. I think there's value to be extracted from it and legitimate debate to have over what Putin said. But the idea that Tucker was going to give some fawning interview and he was in the tank for Putin or he's trying to buddy up to him is preposterous. And I think Tucker afforded himself quite well. Chadwick Moore joins us now. He's New York Times bestselling author of Tucker, the biography on Tucker Carlson. He's a contributing editor at Spectator World as well. Chadwick, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Great to be with you.
So, just give us perspective. Since you know Tucker, pretty well, for anyone, maybe as well as anybody outside of his family, did the biography on him that I just mentioned. The preview he gave, which I thought was quite good, and then his performance against the backdrop of all the people that want him imprisoned for the crime of interviewing a head of state.
Right. So if you recall, he on his show in 2022, I believe it was, on Fox News, he said that they were working on an interview with a world leader, and he learned from a whistleblower in the government that he was being spied on. His private text messages and emails are being read. He never disclosed what that interview was. A lot of us knew it was Putin, and he confirmed that the other day, and that he suggested the government was spying on him once again, that he was ramping up to go to Moscow to interview Putin. The reaction was hilarious, even more hilarious now in hindsight to this interview. As you said, people saying he was a traitor, that he shouldn't be allowed back in the United States. And then you watch the interview. I doubt we're going to hear many people in mainstream media reporting on the interview because
Right.
he was way tougher on Putin than anyone has ever been on Zelensky. That's for sure. And it wasn't in any way fawning. In fact, it was clear that Putin was very annoyed with him many times, especially during Putin's 30-minute history lesson on Russia from the year 800 onward.
Yeah. I was hoping we could start a little further along than the 9th century, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting, though. And also, I don't know, he certainly pushed back on him. I think that it was really interesting to get this take from Putin on how he views the United States and its position in the world from the Eastern perspective. We don't have any idea how the East views us. We're not really, we don't get those opinions. We get American news, obviously. We get European news. But to hear him so frankly speak of why he believes the United States is losing stature in the world and how he very directly put it that you are not the world's largest economy anymore. It's China. You don't hear that in your own country, but it's true. And he also said one of the reasons why he didn't blame what we hear in this country especially from Republicans or from conservative talking heads, that the fall of this country is due to wokeism and DEI and this and that. He simply said it's the aggressive stance you take, and you refuse to embrace the shifting changes in geopolitics and the global economy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was very interesting to hear that perspective for one.
I agree with you, and also just the other pieces of this too. Him saying that he has, he believes, or he has proof, but he can't disclose it because nobody in the West believes him, that it was America, the CIA, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. We still don't really have an answer to that question. But you've got Putin making these assertions now, and so that's fodder for more discussion, more reflection on what we're doing in this country vis-a-vis Russia, as well as more reflection on what we should be doing vis-a-vis Putin, right?
It is, and Tucker was one of the, very loudly on his cable news show, was the first to say, as far as I'm aware, that it was the U.S. that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, that seems obvious to most people. It was a little strange that Putin wouldn't provide evidence, but he did that a lot during the interview, and I think maybe that's just who he is, or maybe it's kind of a Russian thing, for him to sort of be a little sneaky, drop hints, and pull back a bit, say, I'm not going to come any further. But I wonder why Putin wouldn't provide irrefutable evidence that of who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, because he must know it with his massive surveillance and intelligence operations. And he, in that interview, said, well, why would I even bother? You're not going to report on it anyway.
Yeah, right.
That way. So that was sort of interesting.
Yeah, well, and it undermines us. Well, I mean, he's got this whole act he does, and we've seen this before in interviews where he's like, "Hail, fellow well met." He's, sort of he's a proponent of peace. He's trying to forge just a nice little middle class lifestyle for this little hamlet he controls in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. This is what we're supposed to believe about him, but of course it's belied by what we know he does. And so it's just interesting to see the persona that he takes on when he's presenting himself to the West. He obviously knows who his audience is, and this is what he thinks is his best face on behalf of the motherland, right?
Right, and his strong focus on neo-Nazism in Ukraine. Okay, we all know there are like neo-Nazi gangs in Ukraine or groups.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But the fact that he pushed that so hard, you just knew he was trying to play to the Western audience because he sees all that shit. Everyone in America calling each other neo-Nazis, or at least one side calling another. That wasn't really passing the sniff test so hard for me. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Ukraine, but.
Right. That the rationale. He's very concerned about Ukraine because of the presence of these Nazi agitators, and so it sounded like a speech Merrick Garland could give when he was talking about the denazification of Ukraine. I completely agree. That's a great point. Chadwick Moore, New York Times bestselling author of Tucker, the biography on Tucker Carlson, contributor at Spectator World as well. Chadwick, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Retirement